I want to tell you about the most ashamed I have ever felt in my life. I was 66 years old, sitting at my kitchen table at midnight with a calculator and a shoebox full of bills, and I finally made myself add it up, what I'd have to live on when I couldn't work anymore. The number was so small, I did it 3 times, certain I'd made a mistake. I hadn't. My name is Denise. I'm 67. I have worked without stopping since I was 17 years old. I raised 2 kids on my own after their father left, on a nurse's aid's wage, and whatever tips I could make at the diner on weekends. I never took a vacation. I paid every bill. I did every single thing they tell you you're supposed to do. And at that kitchen table, I understood that I could not afford to grow old in my own country. I felt like a failure, like I'd done something wrong somewhere and just never noticed. What I'm about to tell you is how a broke, tired, ordinary woman ended up living by the sea in Portugal and finally, for the first time in 50 years, stopped being afraid. Let me tell you what doing everything right actually got me. My Social Security came to about $1,500 a month. My rent for a 1-bedroom in a town that isn't even nice was $1,400. I want you to sit with those 2 numbers because I sat with them for years. There was no pension. Nurses' aides don't get pensions. There were no savings to speak of. Every time I got a little ahead, one of the kids needed something, or the car died, or a tooth went. That's not complaining. That's just arithmetic when you're a woman alone. So I kept working, past 60, past 65. Not because I wanted to, because the alternative was choosing between rent and food, and I'd done enough of that in my 30s. My feet hurt all the time, my back. I'd started forgetting things, and I was terrified they'd notice at work and let me go, because being let go at my age meant the end of everything. And here's the part I never said out loud to anyone. I hadn't been to a doctor in 4 years. Not because I was well, because a visit was money I didn't have, and I was scared of what they'd find and scared of the bill either way. So I just didn't go. I told myself I was fine. That's what it is to be old and poor in a rich country. It isn't dramatic. Nobody sees it. You just get quieter and more careful and more frightened. You smile at the register and you go home to your calculator and you try not to think about the number. I was so tired of being afraid. It was a girl at work who changed everything. Rosa, maybe 30, worked the desk with me. One day she mentioned her aunt, who'd retired to Portugal, of all places, and was living, Rosa said, better than she ever had in the States, on nothing but her Social Security. I laughed at her. I actually laughed. I said, "Honey, people like me don't move to Europe. That's for people with money." But that night I couldn't stop thinking about it. I don't have fancy internet at home, so the next day I went to the public library, sat down at one of their computers, and typed in a question I was almost too embarrassed to type. Cheapest safe country to retire on Social Security. And the same little country kept coming up. Portugal. I read until the library closed, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt something I didn't recognize. I think it was hope. I'm not going to pretend I was brave. I was the opposite of brave. Every voice in my head said the same thing. Who do you think you are? You're a waitress. You're a nobody. You don't get to do things like this. That voice had been with me my whole life, and it was loud. My daughter Kayla was scared for me. "Mom, you don't know anyone there. You don't speak the language. What if you get sick? And underneath it, I heard the thing she couldn't say. Mom, you can't even afford to do this, which was almost true. But I found the way. Portugal gives a visa to people with a steady income coming in, even a small one. They call it the D7, and my Social Security was just barely enough to qualify. I cashed out the tiny bit of retirement I had left, every dollar of it, to show the savings they wanted. It was everything I owned in the world, and my hands were shaking when I did it. Then I asked myself the only question that mattered. I was going to be afraid either way, afraid there or afraid here for the rest of my life. At least there I might not be poor. So I packed 2 suitcases, most of what I had, and I got on a plane at 67 years old, absolutely terrified. And terrified is exactly how the first month felt. I'd spent every cent I had to get there. If this didn't work, there was nothing to go back to. No apartment, no job, nothing. And the paperwork nearly finished me. There's an agency called AIMA you have to get through, and I'd sit in waiting rooms not understanding a word, clutching my folder, certain I'd done something wrong. One appointment was canceled, then another. I was down to my last few €100 in a country where I knew no one, and one night I sat on the floor of a rented room and cried the way you cry when you think you've made a terrible final mistake. I nearly called Kayla to say I was coming home, except there was no home to come home to. That was the truth of it. But then it turned. The residency came through. I found a little apartment in a town called Setúbal, a real place, a fishing town, not fancy, with a market and the sea and old men mending their nets on the front. My rent was €650, not 1,400, $650 for a clean little 1-bedroom, 2 streets from the water. I stood in that empty apartment with my 2 suitcases, and I did the math one more time, the same math that had shamed me at my kitchen table a year before. And this time, at the end of the month, there was money left over. Not a lot, enough to breathe. I sat down on the floor and cried again, but it was a completely different kind of crying. That was 2 years ago, and I still can't quite believe this life is mine. I buy my vegetables at the market from a woman named Amalia, who's learned my name. Fresh fish for a couple of euros. A coffee costs 80 cents, and I let myself have one every single morning, sitting outside, watching the boats. A small thing I could never once afford to do back home. And I went to the doctor after 4 years. Here, as a legal resident, I'm in the public health system, and it costs next to nothing. I sat in that clean waiting room and I started crying, right there, because for the first time in my adult life, I was not afraid of the bill. Do you understand what that does to a person, to stop being afraid of getting sick? I have a tiny balcony now, with 2 tomato plants and 1 chair. Kayla video calls on Sundays, and she doesn't use the worried voice anymore. She visited in the spring, stood on my little balcony looking at the sea, and said, "Mom, you look 10 years younger." I do, and I feel it. I am not rich. I will never be rich, but I am not afraid anymore. And I did not know, I swear to you, I did not know that a person could feel this light. I spent 50 years believing that if I just worked hard enough, I'd be okay. And I did work hard enough. It wasn't me that failed. I want to say that to anyone out there carrying the shame I carried. If you did everything right and you still can't breathe, It is not your fault. The math was broken, not you. And it is not too late. I was 67, broke and terrified, and I got on that plane anyway, and it handed me back a life I thought I'd already lost. If any of this sounds like your life, please stay with me. There are more stories like mine coming, from ordinary people who found a way. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.